heritage, of course, is something sort of the way I see it is like it's sort of passed down in ways from your parents' generation or grandparents' generation, something obvious you inherit growing up. And for me, I was born in Vietnam, but I came to this country when I was about 1 years old, 1.5 years old. And growing up in the US, heritage obviously was very centered around the family, right? Because once you step out of your home, you start to realize, well, your sort of heritage, or at least my sort of type of heritage, is a little bit different than your friend's heritage. Growing up, your friend who might be different races from yourself. And then, so for me, I started to understand that not everybody has the same sort of experiences, growing up and obtaining those sort of family tradition. Well, definitely family activities. Um, when I was growing up, my family had a family business. So every week, every day actually was always working. I learned to work early on. It wasn't any sort of you didn't, as a kid, of course, you sort of just go with your family unit and you do what your parents tell you to do, which is, in my case, it was my father owned a TV repair shop in San Jose. Whenever I go over to, let's say, my best friend's house, who was this in elementary school, this white kid, and his family is always inviting me over for dinner and partake in their events. And what I also noticed was that all these family photographs were on their wall, especially some of like trips and like camping was a big thing for them. And I just realized, well, that's something we don't do. Like my family never thought about going camping. And I think in my family, it was more associated with of course, the wilderness, being in, which is not you're in a place where you're not protected. You're in an environment where you need to survive. Of course, when you go camping, you bring all your survival tools with you, your tents, and even RVs if you want. But in my family case, my parents never like understand like why does people want to go out there into like nature, and a lot of it from them is really their experience in the refugee camp, right? So it's that connection, like well, we already sort of did that for like a year and a half in Malaysia, Pulau Pinang, right? So that sort of like experience was like never again I will want to do that. But of course, in this new sort of generation now, my siblings who now have families and stuff, and they partake in that sort of American activity of going camping. And of course, like traditions, like for example, religious tradition, like being raised in a Buddhist tradition, of Buddhist household, understanding ancestry, worshiping or altars, recognizing those who pass on their anniversary. Events like that was so unique to just being particularly Vietnamese Buddhists, and those are some other examples. I think a lot of these photographs from the series sort of focus on, they focus on gardens and farms. For example, there's a photograph of a community farms that was started so then the senior could have a job, a salary, basically a salary to when they come over to the US, being sponsored later in their life to come and reunite with their family. But the idea too is that I think what a lot of people Vietnamese American who decide to garden and grow things, I think has a connection to land. And a lot of it is sort of growing the food, you know, again, it's not hard to find like Vietnamese ingredients in the grocery stores and things like that because we live in, I mean, we as in those in California and northern and southern live in a community that a lot of that is available within, you know, our ethnic businesses, right? Grocery stores. But I think one thing was more like about just planting things that, as I mentioned earlier, about like things that you grew up with and seeing if they grow. And of course, in that body of work, Sun La really focused on New Orleans and that climate is so conducive to tropical plants. And it has sort of like things like that will really grow well rather than Northern California. It's hard to plant like, you know, tropical fruits and things like that. And we touch upon this too, where a lot of things are overgrown in a way. And I wanted that has a connection again, just with the landscape of Vietnam, right? Like things are just sort of like lush and overgrown. Of course, you mentioned like the Virgin Mary religion, and I think these are sort of in a way holy places to Vietnamese American spiritually, and also in a way because I think one is that Vietnamese who left Vietnam after the war lost their land, lost their piece of land to home, to connection. So in a way, these spaces are sort of like almost one would say like an achievement, like you now actually own a plot of land and you get to do whatever you want on it, right? Which is again, it's such an American ideology too, because it's like land ownership, right? And so I think again, you know, a lot of people feel safe within sort of their own garden, like they're rather like just spend hours and hours working on it, and then rather than, you know, going out and doing other, at least maybe the generation that like my aunts or my mother's generation, they rather do that than I imagine the younger generation who are not interested in growing things, right? We're like, we don't have time for that, or we don't have, you know, the demand, of course, you know, trying to make a living, you know, in this country too, is totally different than having. And the other thing too is like I'm so happy to see like folks in this age group doing things like this, because it's like it gives them like peace and comfort. And this is like it's more than just like um trying to like grow foods you eat, but it's actually just watching something grow, like planting flowers or planting things. And I think it also like communally is about giving things away, which is so important. I think in I'm sure it's in all culture, but in particularly in Vietnamese American culture, is like you always like you grow these things, you just give them to people just for the sake of giving them stuff. But so I think that's also gives people sort of like a purpose in a way, like, you know, they're giving back to the friends and family or their neighbors by growing things. I actually have a monograph coming out this in a couple of weeks. I'm going to doing my first book signing in Paris, Paris Photo. But the name of the monograph is called The Enigma of Belonging. And it talks about that that question, what is belonging? You know, what is belonging for American soldier who came to Vietnam to fight the war? What is belonging when for refugees to leave their country and go to someone else, and that sense of belonging, like where does that come into the picture? So there's a question I'm obviously still thinking about, even having this body work that's being published. But for me, obviously belonging is just so it's just feeling that there's a place you call home, and it's obviously going to be different for everybody, but I'll just answer it just for myself. It's just sort of feeling comfortable where you're able to see yourself and be represented in society, in your, you know, in your choice of career, endure for me in myself as a visual artist. Um, and I think for you know, back to even these photographs, what I think the what people are trying to do is to feel, to have the feeling of belonging, in ways that they're planting things that are reaching into the earth and roots. You know, I think roots is an important thing, where there's connection to the land. And then of course there's music that I you know, I sense, and it reminds me like the music like my parents will sing growing up, or like even in like family activities like karaoke and stuff, right? And it's like, again, that sense, like, well, now that feels like, at least for my own identity, it feels like home, right? It feels like you're in a place where you don't feel like a foreigner. And I think that's always been like the struggle, right? For any group that's going to be part of the fabric of America, right? Sense that's happening right now in our society, there's a pushback against that, right? We see that in the politics. We see that in happens with the past administration. You know, we see that, you know, make America great again, which is going to make America white again, make America this, you know, like the 1950s, where there was, you know, all these Jim Crow laws, those were happening, stuff like that. So you in this country, there's always this push against that. You know, you see as Charlottesville. So those stuff are scary once you realize that there's in this country that there's people out there who don't want you to belong, right? Who don't want that. So that's that gets back to like when will this happen? And I think for the younger generation, they want it to happen soon. The older generation, we sort of live it already, and it's just an ongoing progress. You know, that is just someday it will arrive. Home is a place like where I get to invite over my family. You know, I'm single now. I don't have a family of my own, but I have my parents are still around, and my siblings are here in the Bay Area. For the past, before returning to the Bay Area, I lived in Arizona for 6 years teaching at Arizona State University, and I've never felt at home in that place. And so when this job opening up at San Jose State University, I quickly, you know, wanted to apply and see if I could return home. That for me is returning to the Bay Area is sort of like returning home. It's again that sense of connection, right? And one more thing that I experienced growing up as a kid in San Jose, California, was that in the beginning, and this was probably when I was maybe between 5 and 10, that I went to a Vietnamese language school, and the teacher there, you know, you can tell who's was once part of the South Vietnamese Army, you know, have a very um, pro Saigon ideology, who told the students that this is not our home. The United States is not our home. We're here temporarily. In a way, we're here like sojourners, and that one day we will move back to Vietnam. You know, we will win the war after all. We will liberate South Vietnam. And, and as a kid growing up at that time, watching a lot of TV, I went back to my parents, like, I don't want to go back to Vietnam. I don't want like that is, for me, I don't see that as home, because growing up in the US, when you see imagery of Vietnam, it's all about the war, the devastation, and you don't see like, why would you want to go to a place where you see bombing, or you see like, you know, and even just growing up in the US, just experiencing that politics in the community themselves, it was, and it sort of scared me too. And it's like, that's not what I want. I want like, I want to be with my friends. I want like to be a kid and safety, all of that. So, but eventually, of course, you know, I think a lot of as Vietnamese Americans established their roots in this country, you know, that this now become our home. This is our second home, you know, you could say our second home or our first home, depending on when how we identify with land, you know, with citizenship or cultural and national identity. So yeah. These days I'm more involved with well, I've always been involved with the arts, and I kind of see that as my community. um I you know, my students are my part of my community because we're in it together in thinking and making visual arts. um so you know, again, the word community is so broad, and it means a lot, but at the same time, it does, what does it really mean? You know, it's just it's a community. But of course, you know, community is a group of people that kind of comes together because of shared activities or sharing common belief. During the pandemic too, like, you know, how communities went online, and I thought that was amazing. Like for example, I started watching a lot of like uh uh, interviews and activities that are like VAALA put together, or Divan, you know, and then that just being part of, just being online with that part of sort of like a Vietnamese American scholarly academic, as well as creatively, you know, group of people. I mean, that is a really unique community itself too. And I only have a few, but well, if I even just say Southeast Asian um, students, which will increase the number, the creative community, these students who want to do the arts, and who are, you know, they will get pushback from their family, which is understandably be so, that, you know, they're worried about the career, the pathway, if they were able to make a living doing something as creative work, you know. So that, I think for me, that is the most important community that I focus on, because it's part of my job. But I take a special attention to students who are who are in that position, and who come out and tell me, oh, this is, you know, can you explain to my parents what I'm doing, and this and that. And um so that, I think that's, like, if you say that, you know, what is the most important community for me, that is the community that is most important, right? To make sure that you know, a younger group of Vietnamese American start to partake in creative activities, because I think that's usually when the community is known, right? I mean, we were known, and you know, of course, it might be a famous Vietnamese chef, or a fashion designer, or an artist, or an author. I think that's when the other community take notice of us, when we do things like this, and that's, it's just so important, right? I mean, it goes beyond. I'm not saying I'm not saying other professions are not important for our community, but that's when we become ambassadors to being what it feels like, and to be Vietnamese American, right? Uh, it's obviously very devastating to see those security cameras and footage of anybody getting attacked, especially when they're um, Asian, because, you know, they look like your relatives. They look like your aunts and uncles, and that could be your mom. And so I think having obviously more artists of color, especially Vietnamese American artists out there doing their thing, is sort of, again, just again talking about our experiences, right? And using the visual arts to teach about these ideas and experiences. And it's or, you know, movies of course fit into that. I think the visual arts really gets out there like faster in a way, and it doesn't get there obviously on a national scale, but it can get there locally too, within the local community. That, you know, these are we're people, right? We have desires, we want, you know, we have this history, right? And we want to feel safe, and we want people to know our story. I think it's so important that emerging artists, how they empower themselves is that they give voices to their parents, and they give voices to that generation, like their experience, because they never realize that their experience is like unique and like so amazing, because no one have this sort of experience. Like my mom remember everything that happened during the refugee boat people experience, right? Because she was living it. I mean, she was like, there in the moment. I was only a baby. So when she tells me these stories, like which I never heard before, I'm like, that is so shocking. Like you never mentioned that before. Like just recently, she talked about witnessing very, very sad. And I want to just content note that, during the, of course, Ukraine and Russia, the war that's happened, the imageries that were coming out. Like my mom will actually in a family event, she was just all of a sudden, she's like, I remember that experience too. We were running, your aunt and I, and we were like hiding, and they were pulling people out. They put them on the line. We were afraid that we wouldn't get shot and stuff like that. And I was like, well, that is like, you never mentioned that before, and then you're living with all these trauma, right? So I feel like, the younger generation who grew up here, that parents like give them this like safe haven, this place to grow up in, if they can, have the responsibility to give their parents voices by making, by just talking to the parent. It doesn't have to become a work of art, but so understand, like, where this is all coming from, and like where these experiences should also be recorded just for an archive. I think that's the most important thing, is to develop this archive that historians could look back, 100 years from now. And again, we talk about the long trajectory, through the long view of our community. Like they could look back and understand these histories that we don't want to be lost within generation passing on. I think talking about the archives, like building up this archive that is growing, and documenting these objects through making art or publishing a poem, poems, writing down your stories, making a movie. And again, it doesn't always have to be about devastating a situation. It also could be about joy and self-care, and all that that comes together in in these experiences. So I think that's for me, is the long-term legacy, that continues to happen. And it doesn't really happen until we move Vietnamese Americans into academic positions and leadership roles, and uh, curatorial positions, collectors. Like Vietnamese Americans should be collecting art, right? We should be collecting things that, I know it's, not everything you buy has to be like thousands of dollars. It could be just simple, buying work from an emerging artist, or like, or like just having things like that among, we talk about our home, right? Among our homes, so then we could share the stories. Like when someone see a piece, and a relative who might not know the arts at all, will appreciate that. Oh wow, a Vietnamese American artist made that, and it's about life and whatever it is, and like um in um Buffalo, New York, right? Or it could be that experience. And so like that piece of art contains that experience, and that to me is the archive. Because it's very easy to throw away a poster. It's easy to throw away all this old stuff that we buy, we hang our house with. But when it comes to an actual work of art that is signed, that someone else made, you want to give that away. You want to pass it down, and that it still lives on. And so it becomes an heirloom. And I think that's one thing too, like I think in Vietnamese American, because again, we're still obviously a recent um, addition to the fabric of this country. If you want to just count the years from 75 till now, right? That practice of heirlooms is really important, like passing down objects, cultural objects to the next generation. And hopefully, again, like my goal is always to get these things into museums, and that so that record could be preserved for a generation to come. Just getting people out to see the work. I think that's that intersection with the culture, with the cultural heritage, when more people are introduced to that Vietnamese Americans are also artists, and like we have work in museums, we have work in books, and people study about us. I think that's just, again, it's just sort of highlights the creativity activities, the creative activities that we're doing, and we're adding back to the fiber of this country. So I think that intersection for me is more about the meeting of people in a gallery, in a symposium, even just me and you now. Of course, you're in it, so you're here, you're doing the hard work, right, to make sure that people understand and get the work out and understand, that what makes our life rich is art form, right? I mean, that's, again, so important. And I think a lot of the Vietnamese American community rather be going to a music festival, like a Vietnamese music festival, or and I'm saying those are awesome and great too. And then musicians are amazing, and they're able to touch on these senses, but there's also like other stuff that are out there that we need to support. So that intersection, again, of just it's where the art happens, because the art, I make the work, is there, but it's not going to be alive, it's not going to be experienced until it goes out there, until it finds another home for itself, if it gets purchased or acquired by a museum or a private collector, but as well as it's able to have its own life too, and is able to is able to speak and breathe and be part of the world, in ways.